about 2-3 minutes, I'll go right back to it. So, what's going on? Any problems you're encountering? You might be worried about an examination. We're not near that yet. I would say we're at least 3 weeks away from that, so I wouldn't worry too much at the moment. I'll give you plenty of warning about that. What I want to do is just keep on with Mendelssohn. If you have any questions that you might want to pose before that, I will take them. But I could just, one thing from the preface here, I'm quite pleased about. I've told you about these things. Maybe I should, one thing, it's a big fat book, there's no doubt of that. I put a dedication page in there like that. And dedication page, the first quote on the dedication page from the Talmud. And it says, it is related that the children of Zadok the priest, one a boy and the other a girl, were taken captive to Rome, each falling to the lot of a different officer. One doesn't usually hear these stories. One officer, I don't even think most Jewish people talk about these stories. One officer resorted to a prostitute and gave her the boy. The other went into the store of a shopkeeper and gave him the girl in exchange for some wine. This to fulfill Joel 4:3, and they have given a boy for a harlot and sold a girl for wine. So very similar to what the New Testament does, taking scriptural quotes and out of context and applying it to present day events 2,000 years ago. After a while, the prostitute brought the boy to the shopkeeper and said to him, since I have a boy who is suitable for the girl you have, will you agree they should cohabit and whatever issues be divided between us? He accepted the offer. They immediately took them and placed them in a room. The girl began to weep, and the boy asked her why she was crying. She answered, should I not weep when the daughter of a high priest is given in marriage to one like you, a slave? He inquired of whose daughter she was, and she replied, I am the daughter of Zadok the high priest. He then asked her where she used to live, and she answered, in the upper marketplace. He next inquired, what was the sign above the house? And she told him. He said, have you a brother or a sister? She answered, I had a brother, and there was a mole on his shoulder, and whenever he came home from school, I used to uncover it and kiss it. He asked, if you were to see it now, would you know it? She answered, I would. He bared his shoulder, and they recognized each other. They then embraced and kissed till they expired. Then the Holy Spirit cried out, for these things I weep. That's in Lamentations, Rabbah, which is a commentary on Lamentations from that period, and another chapter of the Talmud. Okay. I refer to it in my preface, and so I'll read you what I said about that in my preface if you're interested. First of all, I talk about how the Dead Sea Scrolls changed everything. So I'll read you the last couple of pages if you've got patience. You have a minute? Yeah. I know, perhaps, it's, let's see. I talk about some other subjects, then I say, this is not what we're really interested in this book. And what's going to be the subject of this book except peripherally. In this book, what we're interested in is Messianism within the borders of Palestine. Whereas the Romans called the land of Judah the wilderness of Judea, as the scrolls sometimes archaically refer to it. What to a certain degree we shall encounter in the terminology the land of Damascus in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is these documents that came to light or materialized and changed everything. The even more miraculous discovery, because I referred to the Gospel of Judas that recently appeared earlier in this preface, the even more miraculous discovery than the Gospel of Judas, miraculous as it was, of the Dead Sea Scroll 19 centuries after they had seemingly been secreted away in caves, has come back to haunt us all like some unexpected time capsule out of the past. I told you these things. Obviously, the people who wrote them then, and then deposited them or secreted them away, did not therefore die in vain. It is these documents that have happened to change everything, finally giving us the tools to penetrate the darkness of how all these peculiar literary creations we now know came into being, and how the history of the, quote, Messianic movement in Palestine, as it would perhaps best be to call it, was transmuted into something entirely different, wholly alien in Greek, or perhaps more accurately, Egypto-Greco-Roman, if one likes, as just suggested, even to some extent Herodian. But in any event, the very opposite of what was happening in Palestine, Judea, in these pivotably foundational times where the history of man and womankind is concerned. This is what, if someone with a more religious bent of mind were to describe it, is miraculous about their being found. And this, almost exactly at the moment when the new Jewish state was in the process, it would appear, of being born. This is what gives us an entirely new perspective on these events, which those who came before us did not have, and therefore could not use in, for example, something like their quest for the historical Jesus. They didn't have the control the scrolls provide, and had little or nothing to compare things with, for they did not know, except for the often hostile bits sometimes afforded them in rabbinic literature or Josephus, what a native messianic movement might actually look like. A movement most people now content themselves by calling Essene, but now we do, and this makes all the difference. This is why our scholarship today is so different, and this is why we can now do research that our forebears and predecessors, even the most perceptive and incisive among them, could not do. That's why I'm saying that. People say, why didn't you say, people say these things last century? They didn't have the documents to make these assessments. Being often obliged to rely on what were actually mythologized, retrospective, even fantasizing presentation, bordering sometimes even on dissimulation or disinformation. Now what we actually have before us here in the scrolls is the literature of the Messianic movement in Palestine, homogeneous, pointed, unadulterated, and uncompromising. Call it by whatever name you might wish. Actually what it really is the literature of extreme Nazaritism. Therefore, probably the somewhat bolderized New Testament nomenclature, Nazarene, or even revolutionary or messianic Sadduceeism. This is what I've been trying to point out in my several works over the last 20 years. It is for these reasons, too, that I felt obliged to try to break the academic and scholarly monopoly and the literal stranglehold over the publication and interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The two were, in fact, interrelated, that previously obtained from approximately 1952 to 1991. In fact, ever since the international team, as it was called, took over responsibility for their publication. Or, as I expressed it elsewhere, to try to let, quote, 1,000 voices sing. The only way to do this was to allow any interested person to approach all the documents that existed in a totally free manner, independent of mind-numbing academic analyses. And I put this proposition forth in the introduction I did with Professor James Robinson of the University of Claremont to the facsimile edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Having said this, it is the Dead Sea Scrolls that have, as if by some miracle, changed everything. They have given us the native Palestinian documents that did not go through and were left, as it were, untouched by the editorial processes of the Roman Empire. Either the reason or the result, obviously, of their having been put in caves in the first place. Again, an ancient time capsule, Palestinian